The Village of Anmore would like to open our meeting by recognizing the many Indigenous peoples of our area, including the following First Nations with communities that are located in the region that we now know as Metro Vancouver: Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam. Further, we would like to honor the important place in history occupied by the many territorial keepers of these lands and waters around us since time immemorial. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. The recommendation would read:
that the agenda be approved as circulated.
Can I get someone to move that? Moved. Seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Public input. Public is permitted to provide comments to council on any item shown on the meeting agenda. A 2-minute time limit applies to speakers. I will also stress that this is not a public question period. This is only comments to be provided on the items that are on the agenda. Now open it up. If anybody has to provide any comments on the report or anything.
Doug Richardson, 2305 East Road. I'm going to be open here. I've had some conversations with staff, and for the people in the audience, I've shared every number that I've had with staff, so this shouldn't come as a surprise.
Are these comments, Mr. Richardson?
These are comments.
Okay.
So when I looked at the report, and specifically for Anmore South on RS1, and I focus on RS1, there was $28 million worth of capital assets being added for 4.1 kilometers of road. This was compared to $43.3 million for 25 kilometers road, which is all of Anmore. So 4.3 to 25, and you're about half. Makes no sense whatsoever. The point of you go through this, there's a lot of details missing, and I thank staff for putting them in. 45% contingency, street lamps, etc. And also the density is exceptionally low compared to the majority of Anmore. If you pull that out, that 28.4 million drops to 17.1 million, which is stunning when you think about it. The more interesting thing is in the report there is an expected asset levy variance, which in there was minus $3,280, which means this had to be subsidized from the rest of Anmore to support $5 million homes in Anmore South. Makes no sense. If you do that math and pull those things out, street lamps, variance, get some more density, it drops to plus 1,000. That's a $4,000 difference. And we're no longer subsidizing RS1 and Anmore South. The point is you have to be really careful, because that report essentially says everyone in Anmore, if you go RS1 in Anmore South, subsidize the infrastructure there. And I don't think it's true. I think that has to be very carefully looked at, and I don't think it's right to put it out there and then wait 6 months before it can potentially be discussed.
Good. Thank you. Any other comments? Public comments?
My name's Trudy Schneider. I live at 2318 Sunnyside Road. I would like to add some statistics to the graph, and I know it was explained why we didn't have the traffic study included and why it's not being done at this time, because we want to look at what is an actual proposal and then we can get the actual impact. And I'm not claiming that I would know about buses or cleaning services and gardeners and repairmen or whoever else comes to Anmore every day. But I would like to say that for each house, and if there were 120 in scenario 1, there are going to be at least 2 cars, and then it was suggested there might be coach houses, so that would be 4. So that would be 480 cars. I think it's fair to say that that would be the number of cars associated to the property on a given day. There could be more, however, but that would be kind of the minimum. And of course, if there were teenagers in the family, there might even be more. And in scenario 2, because those houses would probably have suites, because that's the way the last 2 subdivisions have gone. So we can also associate 4 cars to those properties. So there'd be 312 properties, according to scenario 2, and that would be like 1,248 cars at a minimum. Of course, as I said, all the other helpers come along during the day, and so there'd be more cars coming into the village and leaving. And then for scenario 3, which was not very well fleshed out, but I fleshed it out myself, so it might not be right, but I I'm going with it. I estimated that I couldn't figure out, of course, if the urban was going to have 3 times as many families or 4 times as many families as scenario 1. But I would estimate that it would have between sort of like 3,370 cars to 4,928 at a minimum, and that's only going up to 4 times as many people. And I think it's fair to add those statistics. And traffic has been a really big concern, but I think, anyway.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to me.
Anybody else for public input? Oh, okay.
Jordan here. Good evening.
Your
First
address,
off,
please.
pardon me?
Address for the
223295 Sunnyside. First off, just a thank you to council and the community for putting the resources and the time together to garner such a report. I know a lot has gone into that, so just tells us as residents that there's a lot of thought going into this process. So, and moving forward, there's going to be some more opportunities to be heard. Regards to scenario 3, I've attended some of the visioning workshops with that developer, and representing a young family and other young families in the community. I think there's some positive things happening and some positive concepts that are worth reviewing, and definitely with the values that have been presented as well, it could be done in a sustainable way, and that's something that's I'm very interested in for my family, including all the generations within my family, and being able to age in place. So I just wanted to add some general comments around kind of what I'm hearing around my generation within the Anmore area. So thank you, and let's continue the conversation.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll now move on to the agenda then. We're on to 4A, new business, Anmore South Infrastructure Financial Analysis Report. Report dated November 18th, 2021 from our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Halliwell. Oh, thank you, sorry.
Dual roles. Thank you, Mayor McEwen. I won't spend too much time going over my covering report. I just wanted to, advise that obviously this report was commissioned by council, and the purpose of it is to provide residents with up-to-date data and assessments in relation to various development scenarios for Anmore South. And I just wanted to emphasize it's important to note that all the completed scenarios are models only and do not reflect any current or contemplated applications. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Boyd to go into his report in some greater detail.
Yeah, and before Mr. Boyd gets started, I just wanted to stress everybody, this report was comprised by 2 professionals. Mr. Boyd did the engineering, and then Jerry, pardon me? Mulholland from JP Rollo did a lot of the financial modeling. Jerry is not with us tonight, but he will be part of our workshop that we're going to be hosting in the coming week, and that's where a lot of the questions will be answered. So please, tonight is very much an overview. I know when we get to public question period, I will remind people of that as well, that tonight isn't the night that we're going to be debating or asking a lot of questions. It'll be a very informal meeting that we'll have with Jerry there to be able to facilitate a lot of the number crunching. So, Mr. Boyd, from the engineering and overview.
Okay, thank you, Mayor McEwen. So just on that point, I believe it's official that the open house will be happening on December 6th, 7 p.m. At 7 p.m.
December 7th?
6th.
6th.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the time.
At
So
7.
Monday, December 6th at 7 p.m. and it will be held virtually via Zoom. So details will be shared through all of our usual channels ahead of that date.
Yeah, and what I would also note, to try and give you the best information from that, is if you have questions prior to, like, email them into us so we can kind of be prepared and try and answer your questions as best we can. And so it kind of helps us in the open house to be able to be a bit more organized in answering questions. If we get duplicate questions, we can obviously answer it all in one go as well. Okay. So, quick overview, as Ms. Halliwell pointed out, that this report was requested from council, and it was to review the existing land down in the south that we refer to now as Anmore South. Formerly known as Ioka Lands, it has many different names, but for this report, we've kind of stayed with Anmore South. And as Judy pointed out, it's really important to note that these are just models only. Like we haven't spent thousands of hours, trying to figure out exactly what the best road configuration would be. That's something the developer would spend a lot of time and effort on. There was a pretty set budget for this project, so we didn't want to get into the weeds too much on road alignments and all the other bits and pieces. But some of the road alignments are determined by the existing roads master plan that the village has. One of them is showing the connection to Crystal Creek. So that's why you see in all the scenarios there's a connection to Crystal Creek. This is the one and only opportunity if this land gets developed to be able to connect Crystal Creek community to the Anmore community as a whole via our actual roadways. Most of you probably know Crystal Creek isn't actually connected directly via roadway right now to Anmore. You have to go outside of Anmore into Bedwall Bay into Port Moody to come back into Anmore, to come back in. So that's one of the reasons why that road connection is shown within the scenarios. Okay, I'll give you, I think most people know the brief background here, but Anmore South comprises approximately 151 acres and it's primarily covered in second growth forest, and some areas have been cleaned of vegetation for previous use. The village of Anmore is currently designated rural, with the exception of Anmore Green Estate, which is designated general urban. However, Anmore South is a special studies area, as I think most of us know about. The special study area is an interim designation in the land use planning document for an area that requires further study before formal designation. This area is currently zoned as RS1. So again, just for those who might not be informed, as a rural community, we're not actually connected to the greater sewer network. I think most people know that. You're all on septic here. And so it's important to note that scenario 1 and 2 could be achieved under a rural designation, whereas scenario 3, in most likelihood, cannot be done under an urban scenario. Would have to be done under an urban scenario, sorry. Okay, I'll just read out the general definitions of general urban and rural for everyone. So, general urban areas are intended for residential neighbourhoods and centres and are supported by shopping, services, institutions, recreational facilities and parks. Within general urban areas, higher density trip generating development is to be directed to urban centres and frequent transit development areas. General urban areas are intended to emphasise placemaking and enriched public realm and promote transit-oriented communities, while transit, multi-occupational vehicles, cycling and walking are the preferred modes of transportation. So that's general urban, and then rural. Rural areas are intended to protect the existing character of rural communities, landscapes and environmental qualities. Land use include low-density residential development, small-scale commercial, industrial and institutional uses, and agricultural uses that do not require the provision of urban services such as sewer or transit. Rural areas are not intended as future urban development areas and generally will not have access to regional sewers services. So I think most of us know in this room about these things. I think it's just important just to note exactly what this is in the context of this development. Okay. Following on, kind of have a table within the report here that kind of identifies what is allowed and what isn't allowed in our current OCP amendments, on our current OCP and other land designations. So obviously we're not actually connected to regional water right now. We are connected to water via Port Moody, and Port Moody is supplied that water by Metro Vancouver. We don't have regional sewer services, as said already. Density isn't controlled by the regional land designation. However, it kind of is by proxy, to be perfectly honest with you. It's covered because ultimately, if you increase your density too high, you can't fit in septic fields. So it does have a relation on density by proxy. Type of housing, the regional designation has no requirement for what type of housing. However, it's kind of assumed that it would be single-family dwellings because of the low density within it. Traffic and parking, there's nothing in the land designation that requires anything to do with traffic and parking. But again, it does talk about, transit-orientated, walking, cycling, those kind of things as well. And environmental stewardship and tree retention. Again, the regional land designation doesn't specifically say anything about it, but by proxy it does talk about, trying to maintain landscapes and other bits and pieces. And so just to wrap this up, the official community plan does involve all of those aspects. It's important to note the OCP has an overarching policy for the public, and it's a very important document from a planning perspective that it's followed, and because it's basically the voice of you, the public, saying this is what we want to see in our community. So if this ever went forward for the land designation to change, the OCP would have to be changed because it's a public document and it's a visionary document for the public. And then zoning. Zoning, again, is very overarching. It controls all of these things as well. And it gets into even more detail than what an OCP gets into. And then there's other bylaws, like our subdivision bylaw. It kind of states what's required for when you're building. And there's a number of other bylaws, like tree retention bylaws and other bylaws, which would be important when it came to subdivision. Okay, that's a general overview of the zoning and land designation and official community plan. So, there's a number of different parts within the evaluation of these scenarios. Kind of given a brief overview for those who might not be intimate with planning lingo and engineering lingo. So there's the overall development area, that's Anmore South. There's dedicated land that we refer to, and now dedicated land, it's important to understand what dedicated land is. Dedicated land does not categorically mean that it's parkland. It's mean that it's land that's given up from the developer to the municipality for the public use. Now that could be all kinds of things. It's something that goes into the land bank of the municipality, to be perfectly frank. And then it's infrastructure. Infrastructure is roads, sewers, water mains, all those kind of things that we run on a daily basis. And then the financial considerations. Obviously, this is one of the big hot topics within here, and we've tried to boil it down into infrastructure. To be perfectly frank, it's trying to cause an apples to apples scenario in a lot of these issues. And as one of the residents pointed out earlier, yeah, there's a lot of nuance in these numbers, and they're a high level. So we've got to consider these are high level nuances that we're looking at right now. Okay. Another section is what you'll hear a lot of is the asset levy. The asset levy is just a part of your taxation. So we can have a graph within here that it's roughly when we take in, $1 of your taxes, what is it? 58 cents of it goes directly to external bodies. It doesn't come into the municipality's coffers. It goes to school boards and the province and policing and those kind of things. So 42% of it comes into the village coffers. And out of that, it's roughly about 20% go to the actual infrastructure costs upkeep. And we determine those levels via what we call the TCA. It basically takes everything historically that we've ever owned within the village, and we depreciate it over the lifespan of that asset, because we're basically mandated by the province to ensure that we have money in the coffers to replace what we have at the end of the day. The reason for this is basically because once upon a time, municipalities didn't tax enough, and then they came towards, our water treatment plant is broken. We can't afford to fix it. And they came to the province, and the province said, well, why should we always give out money to you guys? This isn't supposed to be our cost. So that's why it was determined by the province, by legislation, that we have to take in money to replace the asset that we get onto our balance sheet. So that's why the asset levy is kind of important. Kind of gone into asset levy replacement, and then the CAC contributions. So CAC contributions, they're the things that are basically used to say if we allow increased density, we as a public should get some benefit as well as the developer should get some benefit out of it. Because right now the land is worth, I'm just going to take some numbers. The land is worth $100, but if you increase the zoning on that land, it might now become $200, and really that's just a benefit to the developer. And the way the municipalities look at it, there should be some money that comes back to us as a public for inconvenience and like having to increase the pressure on our existing sidewalks or other things. So there's a contribution made by a developer to say, hey, for the inconvenience this is going to cause you, here's some dollars to you guys trying to offset those things, to increase amenities and all these other kind of bits and pieces. So that's why there's a CAC contribution whenever there's an increase in zoning. Commercial components. So commercial component only really came into scenario 3, and the commercial component is quite difficult to set for Anmore at this point in time because we don't actually have a proposal on the table saying what that commercial component might be. So being able to set a tax rate towards that becomes kind of difficult because that's very subjective. There's nothing that we could say, well, it's going to be this. we could make assumptions, but it would be a pretty heavy assumption. And then the traffic analysis was pointed out earlier. It's very hard to create a traffic analysis when you don't know what the numbers are going to be. The residents, were spitballing some numbers. They're not completely outrageous and wild, what she's saying. The kind of things that we'd have in a model to look at, and we would analyze those things. But I think, again, it's important to note that we spend the money and the effort once we get a proposal in front of us, because then we can really tell you what the models will tell you, what the impacts will be. It's hard to just make assumptions, say, oh, we're going to have more traffic, the problem's going to be this. Because, again, the real issue with traffic is about the movement of vehicles through a roadway, and it's actual turning movements that really start causing issues. You can fit a lot of cars on a road, but it depends how many times someone wants to turn, who wants to interrupt the flow of the traffic, that causes issues with traffic. So it's really important to know what the road layout was going to be, how many people was going to be on it, to really give you a defined answer of what the impact with traffic is going to be. And that is something that most definitely would be done further on in an analysis of any proponent coming forward. Okay, that's a general kind of overview of the things that we've looked at. So the first scenario, RS1 zoning. So this obviously can be achieved. It's under the existing zoning. It is RS1. The developer, in theory, could come in as of tomorrow and say they want to start going forward with a subdivision of RS1. And as part of RS1, all they're required to do is provide basically 5% of the land as dedicated land. That is outlined in the Local Government Act. It's a requirement of any developer for a subdivision of this size that they'd have to give up just 5% if they don't have to do anything with zoning. Okay, as I said, it's a rural land designation right now. So as a minimum, it's 120 parcels could be fitted in there. Further analysis might say it might go up to 130, it might go down to 110. 120 is like the rough ballpark figure that we believe is kind of around the right park for RS1. The reason being that it isn't 151 is because you've got to take 5% of the park dedication. You still have to build roads, there's right-of-ways and other things which get taken out of that land that can be developed. So hence why we've got to about 120. Housing types. So we've just assumed within the housing types that it's a kind of standard Anmore RS1 zone, and especially if this went forward, it would be a pretty expensive piece of property. Estimates right now are about, I think it's about a $1.9 million for an RS1 piece of land. So you can imagine if someone wants to buy that land, the reason that we've kind of made the assumption that there would be one primary house and likely a coach house built on it, because if you're going to spend that much money, you probably want to maximize the return on investment on that. Okay, so that's how we kind of get the average people per parcel to be 5.2. It's basically taking Metro Vancouver and local areas around here of a single family dwelling is normally around 2.6 people per dwelling. And so obviously statistical, you can't have 0.2 of a person, but it's just the way that the math kind of falls out, and it's how we plan things forward, even if it's a decimal. So it kind of gives us the population increase there of roughly 624 people, based solely on an RS1 lot. So our general estimate, again, this is a high-level estimate of $51 million is a capital investment. That is to actually create the roadways. That isn't an investment that would all come onto Anmore's books, because it's things like we wouldn't repay to remove trees, to excavate out material, to place in a lot of material to bring it up to grade. All of that would just stay, because, perfectly frank, gravel doesn't kind of just disappear when we have to replace it. However, there are things that we do need to replace, such as asphalt, curbs, sidewalks. Like the resident said earlier, yeah, I've kind of priced in here that perhaps there would be street lighting down in this zone. So that is a departure from what current RS1 is. We all know there's no street lighting down here, but there's a potential to perhaps do something different down there. So again, I'm kind of trying to highlight, again, if you're making this RS1 zone, it's a pretty expensive piece of property. People might want to expect to have street lights down there. So that's why we've kind of included these costs in here. So when I total up all of these costs together, and then I divide it down by the cost of the infrastructure lifestyle, so the life expectancy, just so you guys know, the way that Anmore right now anticipates replacement of assets, it's roughly 25 years for road assets, and it's about 50 years for linear assets, for such things as storm sewers and for water mains. So that's how our TCA is kind of broken down right now. So that kind of gets us to the $790,000 per year. Now, you know, there's contingencies in here and stuff, you know, and I've gone back as of today to double check these numbers. I've used industry standards to get to these costs. This is the cost that, you know, I do on a daily basis to price these things out. We're pretty good. We use historical values and existing numbers, and I'm pretty confident on this number. However, you know, I went backwards, and the last subdivision this municipality inherited here was Bellaterra. And just so you guys know, that on our balance sheet, just from a road asset perspective, it added over $600,000 per year to our asset inventory that we have to claim back. Now it's divided down between the residents and stuff. So it's just as I benchmarked it, it was like these numbers are true, and it's something that we're already seeing. So it's really important when we inherit infrastructure that we do this math of, is it important to take this infrastructure and we have to replace it? And we're mandated to replace it. It isn't that we get an option to defer this stuff. Like, we are mandated by the province to cover these costs. So it's an important decision the municipality needs to understand and acknowledge. Okay, so when I take the $790,000 that will go onto our asset inventory and we divide it by the 120, it gives us this rough cost per parcel that we need to recover back per year, which is $6,580 per parcel. And so obviously we have to claim back this dollar through taxation, you know, and as I kind of pointed out earlier, only 20% of the revenue that comes into Anmore's coffers goes towards this cost recovery. So that's as the math kind of plays out here. I'm taking the 16,500, multiplied it by, sorry, I missed one part. So we've based our taxation level on what we think would be roughly the evaluation of a parcel of land in an RS1 lot. So you can see there that we've got $1.9 million for the land. This is kind of playing out pretty well right now and on assessment values. And then we've based it on per square foot per square foot of property to build out on this RS1 lot. And we've kind of said more or less, well, people are probably, again, you're paying a lot of money for this lot, they'll probably maximize out the size of house that they could get onto this RS1 lot. So that's how we get to the improvement of $3.1 million added together, and we're kind of saying it's roughly about $5 million. Okay, and then so when we take an approximation of a property already within Anmore that's $5 million in assessed value, and we look at what the taxation level is, it's roughly around $16,500 is the tax bill that comes to that property. So we've used that, and we said, okay, take 20% of that, and we kind of get this asset levy ultimately into it. Okay, so it kind of gives us this basically a deficit within, you know, the property. And now I know people want to talk about this and argue about it. I will give more information at the public open house and show you exactly how I've got to these numbers. And I've triple checked these numbers because it's really important. I've gone back and forth on it. And it's important to note we can't use historical values to base it on our road infrastructure replacement costs. The reason is from the day that it goes onto our TCA is the value that it went in at is when we have to start collecting that revenue. So looking at a property or a road that was built 20 years ago, that cost to build that road is significantly less than what it was in today's value. And the reason that we do it is we basically say, we start collecting taxation on this and we do the expected life value. The reason being, from an economic point of view, you kind of say, well, if we collect $10 and we use compound interest on that for the next 20 years, apparently it should come out to roughly the cost to replace that infrastructure. Now, again, that's a huge economic debate.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add into that, as some of the long-term residents here would realize that some of the roads that were built here initially weren't even properly built. And we still have a fairly, I don't know how long of a section on Sunnyside Road that was still on logs. We didn't bother taking it right down to a base. So there is a lot of the roads. Strong Road is one of them that is not a proper design road. So that's probably a big variance in regards to some of the costs and what we're saying now and what we have to have now with the weight of the vehicles and the standards that are kept in that. So I just wanted to
and
interject
it's
that.
historical values. Like as inflation goes on, obviously, you know, prices increase. We can, you know, go on about that. So again, that's why there's a big difference towards using historical, and today you can't really use historical values to base your taxation on. You have to base it on the asset that you get today, and that's how the TCA kind of works. So it's a pretty important piece of this. Okay, so as the math falls out, it's basically saying that there's $405 per parcel that, you know, is basically left over that needs to be, you could say subsidized, but it oversimplifies the way that taxes are understood and the way that we take taxation. It's all about your average assessed value and where the tax rate and the mill rate goes. It's a really detailed way of doing it, but I tried to perhaps oversimplify it a little bit, just to give you an idea of like, hey, this is apples to apples here. This is what it kind of looks like and how it falls out with on that. And again, because it's already zoned RS1, there'd be zero immunity contributions in the RS1 because there is no rezoning and you only get CACs at a rezoning. So that's RS1. Okay, so a CD development. So CD development in Anmore is kind of phrased as comprehensive development. And historically, here, we only have one CD development that kind of looks roughly like a quarter-acre development, and that's Birchwind. You know, a lot of other CD developments within Anmore right now are half acres and third acres, so they're a little bit larger than this. And one of the reasons we've kind of gone only down to a quarter acre is to do with septic fields. It's because you still need room to be able to put a septic field on your own property. So you can't make the lot too small because then otherwise you don't have the requirements for a septic disbursement field. So that's why we've kind of landed at roughly a quarter. You could argue it could be a fifth. You know, we've kind of gone with a quarter. We feel like that's a, you know, a decent approximation of what this might be as a CD zone.
I think as well, it's regulated in our bylaws that a CD zone cannot go below a quarter of an acre. So the Birchwind subdivision or the McCulloch subdivision is not available with current zoning.
Not currently, yeah.
Same with Countryside.
Okay, so you see the development area is kind of decreased significantly down to 106 acres. That's because we've used what Anmore historically has taken for a CD zone, have taken roughly a third of the land to be dedicated land. So obviously that is a cost to the developer to give that up. You know, they want something in return for that, obviously. Again, you could still get a CD zone under a rural. It's been played out a number of times within Anmore. So we kind of come to the average number of parcels to be 312 parcels. Again, you know, in our analysis, you know, but again, the resident kind of argued that it could have secondary suites. That would be a zoning question, and perhaps you could have secondary suites within here. But in this analysis, I'm going to say, hey, like, because it's smaller properties, I don't think the Birchwind subdivision really has that many suites. I might be wrong, but again, at this size household, we kind of said, hey, we're going to assume that there aren't secondary suites or coach houses in these lots. So that gives us an average population per parcel of 2.6 people. When we multiply that out by the 312, it gives us 811 people. Again, the capital infrastructure cost is 68.5. The reason it's increased is because there's more roadways to be built, more gravel to be moved, more excavation required. Infrastructure replacement is $875,000, and the asset levy per parcel kind of comes out to be $2,800. Again, this is kind of decreased because there's more parcels to spread it around. Okay, and then we kind of got into how did we estimate the 3.1. Again, this is, perfectly frank, this is a really hard one to evaluate the land at quarter acres for the Lower Mainland, because they just don't have quarter acre parcels of land anymore in new zoning. It's kind of unheard of, to be perfectly frank. So it's kind of a hard one to evaluate, but looking at what Birchwind is kind of valued at and other kind of assets, we kind of set it at a $1 million for a parcel of land for a quarter acre. Okay, and then on top of that, then we did the same analysis of per square foot of property. We kind of say we assume that they're going to maximize out the maximum square foot they can have. That's how we got to the improvement value of 2.1 million. Just realized there's an M missing there. Okay, so as we go through that, we then look at the asset levy again, and we kind of say, okay, here, there's a deficit of roughly $800 per parcel. Again, you can see that that's gone up, is because the tax revenue, you know, is drastically different compared to an RS1 lot. The RS1 lot was $16,500, and for this guy it was what was it here? It was $10,000. So you can see there's a bit of a difference there. Okay, so as we kind of play out the math again, it's kind of showing that there's a variance now of $215 approximately. And we kind of estimate roughly the CAC contribution will be between $10 and $13 million. Again, the reason for this is 50% of what we call the lift, which is the increase in value on the land, and the municipality, saying, hey, we should be entitled to some of that profit. So that is that scenario. Now, scenario 3. I think scenario 3 is the one that I think most people want to know more about, and we kind of went through this scenario. There's some significant costs associated with scenario 3. One of the biggest costs associated with scenario 3 is the Metro Vancouver infrastructure cost to provide these services. It's expensive. It's obviously a cost to the developer, and it's something that they would obviously want to get back with costs. So it's a really important part of the analysis when you talk about density, because they need to increase density to be able to offset those costs. So it's an important part of the analysis. You'll see that the Anmore infrastructure capital costs are roughly the same as RS1, but the road lengths and stuff are actually smaller. The reason that it's $40 million is the assumption is that the infrastructure that would go into this roadway system and stuff, and the pipes in the ground, would be way larger and more costly because of the pressure that we put on it by the increase in density. So that's why those things look roughly the same, but underneath the numbers are very different. Okay, and we kind of, that kind of again plays out to be about $780,000 that would go on to Anmore's asset sheets. Now, perfectly frank, a wrench was thrown in the works here as we were coming towards the end of this analysis, of that the proponent came forward and said, hey, we want to tell you that we'll come forward with an analysis, and there was perfectly frank, some conversations had about should we release all the information that we currently have and just show all of our cards at this moment in time. And perfectly frank, it was part of my decision here to think I don't think it's a smart idea to show all of our cards at this point in time to the developer of here's what we think density needs to be and the numbers to get back these costs, because it's kind of a poker game to some degree when it comes to a negotiation here, and showing all your cards isn't a very clever idea. But what I can tell you is, yes, we've done a lot of analysis, and this analysis is going to be used as we get the proponent's information, and we're going to use it and benchmark it against what we have to see, the numbers that they've come forward with, are they realistic? Do they make sense? And those kind of scenarios. So I would say we've done a lot of analysis. It's waiting in the wings, and once we get their development forward, and as long as council are okay with it, we're happy to release our information to say this is what we have after we've if we do go into negotiations with the developer and show them out to show that we have done a lot of work for it. Okay, and so then we have the comparison table here. It kind of obviously highlights where we're at. We've kind of used a bit of a different scenario when it comes to development area. The development area we've kind of assumed for a really, let's just call it an urban designation, that the village could take up to 50% of the land. Now that's a lot to ask, but it's also a lot to ask to increase the numbers. So we kind of said 50% seems to be a reasonable number. That only leaves 75 acres to develop for the proponent. And we've assumed that, there would only be 1.8 people in a unit, because we're assuming obviously that wouldn't be houses per se. It would probably end up being condo units. So therefore the average population in such a residence decreases. Okay, and then I've kind of talked about life expectancy and stuff within here. That's, I know people want to talk more about the scenario 3. As I said, it's kind of hard for us to talk about it openly right now. But I hope to be able to have that conversation more as we get the developers' information, and we can be even more transparent of how we've got to these points. I think that's about it for my closing.
Good. Well, thank you. And again, I look forward to listening in on the information session with Jerry there from JP Rollo. I know when he did the infill, he was a very knowledgeable person and was able to answer everybody's questions in regards to where he came up with some of the evaluations and that. So he's well versed in land economics. So I'll just open up to council. Oh, sorry.
If you don't mind, Mayor, I've got a recommendation, and then if council would like to consider moving then discussion can occur. So the recommendation is that council receive the ISL Engineering Anmore South Infrastructure Financial Analysis Report dated November 2021 for information.
Okay, can I get someone to move receipt? Moved and seconded, and I'll now open up for council. Want to start off, Councillor Wevery?
Just a couple of questions. There's one little clarity item. In the staff report, there's an inconsistency about the two numbers on the RS1 scenario and the CD scenario. It says on page 3, 405 for the scenario 1, and then it says 300 for scenario 2. So,
It should read 405, that's a typo
okay.
in the
Well,
report.
actually, I was
Thank
going to
you.
say, should it read 205 or 210?
So the amount for RS1 was $405, and the
that's-
amount for scenario 2 under the CD development was $215.
Okay, so that's a correction then.
Thank you.
Okay, on page 7, let me double check here. Sorry, I got double page numbers here. Let me start from the beginning. In the report, it says this statement, there's a statement that says assumes, it sort of assumes that council will move the upcoming proposal forward. Just trying to find the right page here. So on page 7 of the agenda, under communication civic engagement, I just want to make it clear that we may not move a proposal forward from the proponent. I just don't want that implication in the report that we're going to do that. It really depends on what they come forward with. We may just reject it outright. It's on the very last
Last bullet.
paragraph on page 5, 7, depending on how you read it.
Yeah.
Just for clarity. I guess a question for Mr. Boyd on page 17, that $60 million under scenario 1. Sorry, under scenario 3, the $60 million for the Metro Vancouver infrastructure, does that include the Anmore portion and the part that would be going through Port Moody? Or is it just the
No,
Anmore
it's
portion?
strictly just to bring the pipe to basically to the Anmore south border of Anmore.
Okay, so, but that would become Metro infrastructure, would it not?
Yes.
Yeah, they
So it
would
would be paid for under Metro taxes?
Yeah, so, yes.
So you become a member of the sewer district, or, you know, you apply the taxes to
Yeah.
that area, and then they would pay that
They
portion?
depreciate it
Yeah,
in
okay.
place. Yep.
And then the 40 million, that includes the Anmore sewer, water, everything, basically?
No, it doesn't include sewer on this one, because I'm trying to just do like for like on apples to apples, but again, if we wanted to include sewer, that number would go up.
Okay, so the 60 million is just to get sewer to the border?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and actually you did clarify it about, like, for example, the $51 million under scenario 1 for the infrastructure. That would include all the excavation and the road beds. That wouldn't necessarily be what we're paying to replace
No,
it.
so when we look at the replacement, we
Yeah.
basically, it's really only surface stuff that we would replace.
Right.
Like, in a general term, yes, sometimes we have to remove some gravel underneath existing roads, because it's got soft, there's kind of technical reasons for
But
it.
you're not moving earth to create
No,
the
we would
roads.
never, we never in our asset inventory say, well, this cost $51 million, we have to put $51 million back. We're required to say when this becomes, not obsolete, when it becomes end of life, which
Yeah.
is really asphalt, curbs, sidewalks, we have to just replace that component.
Okay.
But I just would interject that, you know, being on council for quite a while, when the culvert failed on Thompson, that was a significant repair and in the millions of dollars that we weren't aware of. And it was, you know, we had to really dig that whole area completely out because it was never properly placed. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's just, we're dealing with some history of infrastructure that was not up to our current standards.
Sure, I suppose, you know, to clarify that point in this, you know, like, these costs are in line with how we would use our subdivision bylaw and what our requirements would be, so they're pretty significant. Because we want to build infrastructure that lasts as long
Yeah.
as possible for us.
And then I guess the final question, well, it's not really a question. The 3.1 million on scenario 2 for the estimated parcel evaluation, I guess I'm just gonna say there's probably not a good comparable in Anmore. Birchwine's not a good comparison because the lots are actually smaller and the houses are old. So, if we had a quarter-acre lot with a brand-new house, I don't know what it would sell for, but I guess it could be close to that. I mean, if you put a 4,000 square foot house there.
As I clarified, it's a really hard one
Yeah.
to peg because we just don't have quarter-acre lots in the Lower Mainland, and the ones which are already serviced by Metro Vancouver
Right.
servicing and stuff. So.
Okay. Okay, another question I had. If it was, say the developer went with RS1, now that we have infill, chances are they'd want to design an RS1 subdivision with 1 acre lots that would be infillable. Would that have an impact on our roads? Like, would that increase the amount of roads that they would want to put in? And would you, as the approving officer, have some say in reducing that?
I'm not the approving officer.
Oh, that's right, sorry. But as the one that's overseeing the subdivision application, and ultimately Martin as the approving officer, or whomever it is at the time, would
So-
that be taken into consideration? Because that's one thing where we could have shot ourselves in the foot a little bit with infill. Is you could end up absorbing slightly more infrastructure.
So the infill policy kind of states that to really be eligible for infill, you shouldn't have to create any more infrastructure.
Exactly.
So you shouldn't have to build any more roads. You shouldn't have to build any more, like what I would call water main and storm sewer infrastructure. Yes, you have to provide services to it. That's that's kind of a given for it. So I would say, perhaps the question you're asking, could RS1 turn into, I don't know, half-acre lots? The answer is, I suppose, if the developer set it up in that way and it had enough frontages and it made the requirements of
And
what
if
our
future
infill policy
councils
is,
approved it.
and if future council approves them, there always goes through rezoning, so there's always that aspect. But if it met the requirements, I suppose in theory you could have half-acre lots all the way through there after 5 years of subdivision.
Right,
Because that's
okay.
how the policy's written.
Okay. That's all I need to know. Thanks.
Any other? Oh, Councillor Laidler.
At the moment, I'm correct that we pay Port Moody for the amount of water we use.
Yes.
Under which of these scenarios would we not have to pay for water to Port Moody?
Scenario 3.
And why would that be?
Because you'd be bringing the Metro Vancouver, like water and sewer, to Anmore South.
Do you have to pay for that at all?
The developer would have to pay for it. I mean, Metro Vancouver wouldn't install this. Metro Vancouver would basically say, if you want this, you have to pay us for it. And so from our perspective, we'd be saying, well, that's a developer cost. That isn't an Anmore cost. Because we don't need it right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Trowbridge.
Chris, I just want to check a couple of things here. The average population, I think I heard you say it, but I want to confirm it, is sort of, I'll call it industry standards, sort of provincial standards. That's where you're coming up with the 5.2 people.
Yeah, so the 2.6, so there is census, so it's based on census data, the last kind of census data that's been analyzed and published. I think
Yep.
it's 2016 off the top of my head.
Yep.
And it comes from there, there's a table within within this link, and it kind of lists out all the different municipalities and the general average population per household.
Got it.
And that's where it's going to take them.
And then the estimated tax increase per parcel, that's the tax that would be distributed to the rest of us.
Yeah, in a similar term, yes.
Yeah, okay. And then, this is a bit of a reach, I don't even know if you can answer it, but, we're typifying scenario 1 and 2 as being available under RS1. If the proponent was willing to carve off enough land and create an on-site sewage treatment plant, a la Tawasin, could they not theoretically do a density development under RS1? Because it wouldn't require sewer.
Not under RS1, because RS1 is a zoning designation.
Not under RS1, but under a CD, modified CD.
Yes, but there's other hoops that you'd have to jump through, such as provincial regulation, and they'd have to approve it and we'd have to have our own liquid waste requirements. The option, yes, I suppose the option is in theory, yes.
I find it categorically undesirable. I
Yeah.
just want to know if that's,
Yeah, it could be an option, I suppose. Yeah.
okay, that's it.
Brings up a couple interesting points. I have a few questions, and it does. One of them was related to the sewage treatment plant. So, Tawasin, and anybody in this room can Google it. It was about $26 million to put in a plant, and that plant facilitates a fairly significant commercial area and residential area. It's significantly less numbers than we have actually here. So I think that's an interesting thing. And I know that there's been some interesting discussion as of late regarding my colleague, Mayor McLaughlin in Lions Bay. It's one of the reasons why they were in the urban containment boundary, which up to about a month ago, I argued profusely with him that he wasn't. But sure enough, he is classified as urban, and he argued back at me, and he couldn't believe that we were rural anyway. But that's part of the reasons why they were in the urban containment boundary, because they have a communal septic field. And it's also to facilitate density. They've kind of had a public opinion poll about changing that designation, which I don't know how it will go, but it's mainly in the pretense of wood-burning fireplaces, because they have no natural gas, they have no water, they have no sewer, so they really, and they have no transit, so their designation as an urban designation makes zero sense. And it kind of shows how the urban designation boundary is very much in flux throughout the region, and there's a lot of anomalies there. So anyway, I guess getting back to my question regarding RS1, and it was sort of touched on by Councillor Wevering, I believe that number is extremely low, of 650 residents. I think it's closer to 1,000. I think that, a RS1 subdivision, and then if you just even took like corner lots that could easily facilitate the frontage regarding infill down the road, you could do that. So, in my mind, I think truly the number is closer to 1,000 residents that are going to go there with no influx or input from this council whatsoever. Basically, they could, as you said, they could come and do it. I will tell you, back in 2013, when we were about to engage on our latest official community plan, the Advisory Planning Commission said, how do we talk about land use if we don't know the financial implications of it? And so the APC came to the council at the time and talked very, very passionately about the financial, about the decisions that we make in the upcoming OCP. So we put some money together, and we got the Van Struth Financial Sustainability Plan in 2013, and it actually talks at a very high level the things that you've actually determined today. It talked a lot about, and I was just looking through it, and examples of subdivisions that were done previously, i.e. uplands, where they have a pump station of $5 million that at the time that basically facilitates, I think, 10 homes and is paid for by the entire village. A lot of these things we would not do nowadays. And it kind of came to light 3 years ago when we had a proposal from Pinnacle Ridge, and that's a significant land mass. There's about 100 acres up there for people that don't realize. And we asked for a quick analysis. This is much more in depth, but we asked for a quick analysis, and you came back and said this could bank literally, the cost of that infrastructure is so substantial, and then the proponent withdrew their application. So, this council does look at things from a financial long-term lens. So anyway, I just, that's my only thing on the RS1. I understand the scenario 3, and I too wish that we had more information. I guess the other thing is we don't know what even the units that could be forthcoming. Are they condominiums? Are they duplexes? Are they townhouses? Are they smaller lots? We just don't know to be able to distribute those costs over. So I think it's, and then with receiving a letter of intent, basically, again, we don't have a proposal, but a letter of intent outlining that something is coming forward, it does put us in a difficult situation. So those are just my comments to kind of sum things up. I think you've done a great job. I am looking forward to Jerry and you answering a lot of questions, and I hope people, in the meantime, could literally, if you do have anything now, email them. Email them to any member of council or Mr. Boyd, and that we can forward them on. Like I said, all of council, this will be a workshop that is not being led by council. It's being led by the professionals, and I'll be there listening in to listen to a lot of the answers and questions. So, good. So, seeing nothing, I'll call the question. All those in favor of receipt? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Okay, we'll now move on to 4B, the Anmore Community Hub. Next steps. Ms. Halliwell.
Thank you, Mayor McEwen. So I wanted to take an opportunity to provide a bit of an update to the community in terms of the Anmore Community Hub following the tender issuing over the summer, and also to seek endorsement and approval from council on a particular new method that's being recommended by staff to move the project forward. So as council will recall, back in the early summertime, we had receipt of tenders for the designed Anmore Community Hub. It was designed through Johnson Davidson Architecture, and while we had pre-qualified 8 general contractors, we only received 4 bids, and all of those bids were over the current allocation of funds for the project, which is set at $8 million. The lowest bid, for information, was $9 million, and it went up to about $9.8 million as the highest bid. So following the receipt of those tenders, staff started entering into some discussions with ISL Engineering about how we might be able to approach the project differently in order to ensure that we were coming within the allocated budget that council had. And a process or a methodology called an integrated project delivery method was introduced as a way that has been recently very successful in these types of circumstances where you've got an allocated budget and you need to ensure that you're coming within that budget sort of no matter what. And an integrated project delivery method involves a designer, so that's the architect and their subconsultants, as well as a general contractor and the owner, being the Village of Anmore, all entering into one single contract or one single agreement to essentially see the project through to fruition. Now for us, because we already have a design of the building that council has endorsed and is really keen to see that come to life, we do feel that we can do some slight redesign work in order to ensure that it is able to come within budget. We have elected as the village to exit the contract that we had with Johnson Davidson Architecture. We've paid for the services rendered, and we do have access to those design drawings to be able to utilize those going forward as well. So bringing on a designer would see some slight revision to those drawings, as well as bringing on a general contractor, as well as ourselves to work through this integrated project delivery method. Now, the sort of the key to this being successful is, as I said, all parties enter into one contract, and everybody essentially has interest in making sure that the outcome is successful. So we have a building that looks the way we want it to look and is within the budget. And to do that, there has to be full transparency. So everybody shares their actual costs, their markups, and it's a very, very transparent process. And as well, all 3 of the parties are working collaboratively to come up with solutions when problems arise to, again, ensure the successful outcome of the project. So we're eager to move forward with this type of sort of innovative approach, and to do that, there is an expert within ISL's broad portfolio of engineers and experts that has been through this process a number of times, and so I'm looking to seek approval from council to bring this person on board to be able to coach us through the process. It's most important in the first few months as we're going through the redesign, ordering products, and making sure everybody's on the same page to have somebody sort of overseeing that process that's an expert in that field. And so we anticipate that that cost would be an upset price of up to $10,000 for those services. So seeking approval for that, and as well, just to note that we certainly will not be circumventing any procurement laws through this. What we have the ability to do within the law and without breaking any rules is to essentially issue a notice of intent for direct award to a general contractor and the designer. And that would go on BC Bid publicly, and assuming that we don't get anybody who would not agree with that approach, then we could move forward with direct award to those companies. And if there was any sort of dissenting voices on that, we would go through a formal RFP process, which of course would add to the timeline. But we're conscious that we'd like to get the project moving forward sooner rather than later. The recommended option from staff tonight is that council authorize staff to enter into the necessary agreements to enable an integrated project delivery method for the construction of the Anmore Community Hub, and that council approve a budget of up to $10,000 to fund the integrated project delivery coach from capital reserves.
Someone to move that? Moved, seconded. Open up for discussion. We'll start at the end. Councillor Laidler.
Could you explain what happens, suppose the raw materials in price go up? Would it push over the $8 million?
No, so that would all be part of that decision-making process. So before anything is ordered, and when you order it, you secure that pricing. If we were to sort of go out to the market and find that the raw materials, certain raw material that had been selected through the design was going to be cost prohibitive, then we would come up with alternates as a group and agree to that before the product is ordered.
Councillor Webering.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about IDP. It's similar to design build with some even more cost controls, and I think you just said it best. I mean, you have a building, and the key is the function of the building. I think where our architects, I don't completely blame our architects. I mean, we had COVID, and I'm in the business, and I've seen costs go up crazy. Really, the building that we hope to build today, we'd never be able to build that for less than our budget. So really what it does is we build a slightly lesser building with different materials, cheaper materials, but it still functions the way we intended it to function. So I think it's probably the way to go. I think the easiest thing to do if we were a bigger municipality is just to raise the budget. I think that's what a lot of municipalities would do, but I don't think any of us wants to do that. I don't think the public wants us to do that, so we're not going to do it.
Good. Anything else? Councillor Cryer.
I just have one quick question. With the IPD coach, so that is just the beginning of the project? Is there any concern or fear that it may have to continue, or does it just get them set up and?
Do you want to? Sure.
Yeah, so the way that the coach works in this circumstance is because it's a very new process, and perfectly frank, there's been very few of these done in the Lower Mainland, so contractors and designers are just not aware of how this really works. And so the lady who would come in, called Aura, she is actually from Alberta. She's done a lot of this in the past. She has a history of being a contractor and now a designer, so she's well versed in this. So the way that the coach works is, and the way the ITP works, is that this $10,000, you could think of it, is above the $8 million. But she is required during the process of building the village centre, the hub, her costs get rolled into that 8 million. So it means, if she's needed too much, it means, that budget has to absorb that cost type thing. So that's why you get this kind of cost certainty of $8 million, because that's the budget. You're not allowed over it. And if unless you get the owner to agree, hey, we really need this, we want to throw in another whatever it is to get whatever you really want. Or you have to downsize, change materials, whatever the case may be.
Thanks.
Good. Councillor Trowbridge.
You answered my coach question, but I have another question. We have some already sunk cost, as we all know. I think it's implied, but I want to hear it stated, that cost plus any new costs will still be within the parameters of the 8 million. That's the whole purpose of making the shift, as I understand it.
So the original design budget was approved over and above the original $8 million. However, you are correct that any design work that happens from here on out through this process will be within that $8 million.
Right. It's not added on to what we've already spent.
No.
Perfect. Thank you.
And maybe just for clarification as well, I wanted to mention that we have had a steering committee oversee this going forward, which has included a counselor as a liaison, and that's been Councillor Trowbridge, and the anticipation is that that will continue. So the steering committee as it sits right now is myself, Councillor Trowbridge, and Karen Elrick from the village. So we will continue our involvement as we have through the design process as well, overseeing the project.
Go ahead.
So that means we're in these meetings? Or we're reviewing the outcomes of the meetings like we were before?
So I think that'll be a discussion for this, for the steering committee. So in order to make this work, what I'm going to propose, assuming that council endorses this tonight, is that we have a meeting where all of the expectations of this process, as Mr. Boyd mentioned, it's fairly new. All of those expectations are clearly laid out. The key to making this work is to literally have a dedicated space, a dedicated room, where if decisions need to be made quickly, everybody who can make those decisions is in the room. So my anticipation is that that will involve the project manager that the village hired earlier this year, as well as anybody that council and the steering committee feel is important in order to be able to make those decisions on the fly.
Well, just a recommendation off the top of my head that when, is it Aurora? When Aura comes in and does the initial orientation, et cetera, and maybe the first 2 or 3 meetings even, I think the steering committee should be involved in that, because if as a member of the committee, I want to know exactly what's being said and whom it's being said to and what the takeaway should be, so that when we have a more distant relationship with the professionals, we can at least understand the language and know what they're talking about.
Thank you.
Good. And I just want to kind of just do a recapture on where we're at now. So I guess when I got on council in 2008, 2009, we had a finance committee meeting, and we realized that this was something that was going to have to be built at some point, but we didn't want to go through the same situation that the community center daycare went through, and so we put money off each year to fund this. And we have we've saved each year because it was the focus. The 2 focuses of our financial plan were the new Village Hall and Sunnyside Road, and we've pretty much done most of Sunnyside Road, and so the Village Hall has been waiting in the wings for quite some time. I just wanted to refresh, this building that we're in right now is a rental. We rent this at about $3,000 a month. The other one was supposed to only be there for 10 years. It's been past that, and I guess these ATCO buildings have a lifespan of about 15 years?
15 to get a little smelly.
Yeah, so we also have a school that is not seismically upgraded, so we do not know how long we'll even be able to have some access to that in the future. So, you know, we saw this as a need 8 years ago. We did hear back when we started this project a desire from some members of the community saying, well, we paid for this, you know, we have the money in the bank to pay for this. What about the future residents? And so this council authorized that we would even put some debt on it for if that would make it happy, so that it would be offset with some payments down the road. So anyway, I just wanted to pass that all along to where we're at right now. I'm looking forward to getting this moving. I think it's a great design. I think what we've seen during COVID, it certainly could have offered us a lot of opportunities in this village during the pandemic, and it certainly outlined a shortfall that we have. So anyway, with that being said, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Halliwell. We'll now move on to 4C, Light Up Spirit Park Event 2021. A verbal update. Ms. Halliwell.
Thank you, Mayor McEwen. So I think I'm going to share the stage here with Councillor Creer, I hope. I think based on the last meeting, it was requested that we give some further consideration about what other communities are doing, and thankfully, Councillor Creer was able to follow up with some of our neighboring municipalities, including Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, and Coquitlam. And our understanding is that they are all carrying on with some form of holiday event outdoors, slightly modified to make sure that they're within the public health order guidelines. I've also followed up with our events coordinator, Ms. Perrin, and she would be available to assist the CC committee in any planning. But I think that the idea would be that it would be sort of a Light Up Spirit Park light, so a sort of a pared down version of what we might have seen before. So Councillor Creer, I'll pass it over to you to talk about any further ideas you've had and what the next steps would be in terms of the CC committee's discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Halliwell, and thank you to Nancy Maloney for the suggestion to reach out to the other municipalities. I did do that, and I found out that they are all moving forward with all of their events, with the exception of the CP Rail train, which I guess is more of a national event because it goes across the entire country. So they are moving ahead with both indoor and outdoor events, limited. Again, similar to what we're referring to and doing it a little bit light, but yeah, with different provincial health order parameters in place, they're moving forward with everything. So I am going to suggest that we also do a light version of Light Up Spirit Park. And if approved by the rest of council, I think what we'll do is we'll start an email conversation with Ms. Perrin and the CC committee. I do have a few ideas. I know we spoke of the carriage, the horse and carriage. That's certainly an option. Little concerned about that. It's outside, so people could wear masks, but I think we would have to limit the number of people, and there does always seem to be a shortage. There never seems to be enough time to get everyone on that ride, and people really enjoy it. So we were thinking perhaps with Georgia Lyons, our young community member who spearheaded Candy Cane Lane last year. She is doing it again this year, and she's starting it on December 3rd. Nope. 4th. She's starting it on, no, she's starting it on Friday.
Okay, so that's the third.
Yeah, so she thought she would start on the 3rd and then go into a week into January. And if we do Light Up Spirit Park on the Sunday, the 5th, as we had planned, perhaps we could block off Ravenswood as we've done in the past, and we typically do with the horse and carriage, and maybe do more of a stroll, something along the lines that we do in Halloween, where people can just wander around. I think a couple of suggestions in the park would just simply be, maybe we could get the school choir. It's coming up pretty quick. We'd have to have a conversation with them. I have reached out already to someone there. Do the bonfire, maybe bring in a couple of food trucks. The bar, perhaps, if we can. I don't know. Hot cocoa for sure. So I think we have the makings of a very nice evening with extra lights. I think that I'm grateful that Ms. Perrin is available to take this on, and then the CC committee, we can maybe come up with some other ideas, and if anyone at the table has anything to add, that is all I have for ideas. There's a conversation about Santa. I don't know. We've lost our Santa that we typically have, and Santa's very busy.
And then possibly even maybe inviting, as we did previously, a couple food trucks so people could come up and get something to eat. We could locate those in the parking lot. And that, so, and then we would do our Light Up Spirit Park on the Sunday, and that, which would be great. So, good.
So I can
Sure.
possibly share a resolution, if council would like to consider, that council support the 2021 Light Up Spirit Park event to occur on Sunday, December 5th, in a limited capacity and within all public health orders.
Someone to move that? Move seconded. I'll open it up for any more questions, comments. Councillor Laidler.
Is this going to be limited? Will that mean that there's going to be a gate that someone controls? And if so, will the people coming in have to be double vaccinated?
Limited in what regards?
Well, Councillor Cryer said it was a limited.
I think the event is limited. I don't know about people. Is that?
Activities, limited activities.
Yeah.
It's outside, and we can have, I believe, up to 1,000 people.
I
in an-
believe the public health orders are actually up to 5,000 in
Okay.
outdoor spaces.
So masks would be optional, and there is not a requirement to show a vaccine passport.
Okay.
Because we're outside.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this. We'll now move on to public question period. Purpose of public question period is to provide the public an opportunity to ask questions of council on items pertaining to village business. Time limit, 2-minute time limit applies to speakers. Questions are to be directed at council through the chair, not to individual members of council or staff. Council reserves the right to defer responding to questions in order to obtain more information required to provide a complete and accurate response, including referring operational questions to staff to follow up. Council will not tolerate any derogatory remarks directed at council or staff members. And I will remind everybody that questions regarding the Anmore South infrastructure should be held off until we have our meeting, a specific meeting, which will just be there to deal with that. So, with that being said, we just had a meeting last week. We don't have. So, is there any other questions? Yeah, I don't know which one did it first. So.
Thank you, Ken Uvick, 120 Lansing Crescent. My question isn't with the specific report, but it is to do with process and the upcoming workshop for that, looking at those reports. I'd just like to know, why are we rushing this on December 7th when everybody, including Mr. Boyd and yourself, have said that the report is incomplete because there's an important application coming forward. Mr. Boyd says this is a significant development and one that should be analyzed and benchmarked appropriately against scenario 1 and 2. So it's not finished. So why are we having a workshop?
Do you want to, Ms. Halliwell?
Sure. Just for clarification, it's December 6th. I think you mentioned the 7th. That's our next regular council meeting.
Okay.
The purpose of the open house is to ask questions on the report that was presented. And as was mentioned within the covering report as well as the ISL report, any proposal that comes forward that would look at scenario 3 would involve its own community engagement and opportunity for input. So this open house is to provide an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions on what's been presented so far.
It's just dealing with the report. Yeah. Mr. Boyd?
To be honest, it is about the report as well, but I think it's also important to hear what questions you as the public want answers to as well when we get proponents' development forward, so we can analyze those and make sure that we answer the questions that the public want answered, and that's why I'd say submit your questions because they're important. Like, it's important to hear what your questions are going to be and to make sure that we provide as much analysis and information as we possibly can to you as the public.
Yeah. It was a financial analysis and there's a big piece missing, and
Yep.
I just think it should be done all at once.
And please email, if you have any specific, please email them off to council or to Mr. Boyd, Head of Development Services. Ms. Maloney.
Nancy Maloney, 1724 East Road. And I actually had a couple of questions, but I'll follow up first on the previous question. I do have some concern that the open house is only going to be accessible via Zoom, which potentially eliminates some people within our community when this is a very important meeting and should be accessible to all persons. So while Zoom is a very, very good option for some people, it's not a good option for all people. So I would like to request that council do something so that people who, for various reasons, are not able to participate via Zoom are able to come to an in-person location in addition to Zoom, perhaps.
So certainly, a phone call, requesting a meeting, perhaps with Mr. Boyd, or emailing your questions is an alternate option for people who aren't comfortable with the Zoom platform. I know that some residents have also joined up with their neighbors who might be a little bit more technologically comfortable to be able to still participate in the meeting. So there are a few options that are available.
And the village will support people in trying to create those options.
Yeah, we will
Yes.
absolutely support what we can in terms of hearing from the public, for sure.
Okay, the
Okay,
next question.
Okay, shall I just go ahead with all my questions at one time here? Okay, so thank you, Polly. I wanted to thank Polly for researching with the other communities about their Christmas events. But I know Paul may be interested in this as the chair of our Environment Committee, and I would like to request that, and I know Paul is also a fan of people sitting around fires together, which for sure is a very traditional thing to do. But I am more than happy to supply research to all the members of council. But bonfires are actually very bad environmentally. And I would like to see Anmore be a leader in environmental sustainability, not to continue to do things which are somewhat traditional, but probably should have maybe even sometime in the past been ended. So not only are bonfires very hazardous for our environment, but they're also hazardous to people. Yes.
I'm just going to get, this is question period. If you could get to your question, Ms. Maloney, please.
Okay, so my question is, could council or Polly and her committee look into this as to whether a bonfire is really something that is a desirable option for our community doing, perhaps with consultation from Paul's Environment Committee? And if you would like information from me, I'm happy to provide information. Okay, more questions?
Go ahead.
Okay,
I don't see the
so is it a problem that our employee, Chris, is also part of ISL, and the village is giving ISL money for the work that ISL does? Like, is this a potential
I'm going to refer this over to Ms.
conflict of
Kelly.
interest?
Thank you. Mr. Boyd is not an employee of the village. So Mr. Boyd provides us with consulting services in a number of areas. Engineering is one, and he's also taken on the role of manager of development services, but he is not an employee of the village. And in terms of this particular report, council directed the work to be done, and I recommended to utilize ISL because they had familiarity with it within the village to be able to pull together the information. And as well, the amount that was being allocated for this was within our trade partnership agreements, that it didn't have to go out publicly. So I felt that it was the best value for the village to have Chris's expertise.
Legally, under the Employee Relations Act, is Chris then a contractor?
Correct.
Okay. And last question.
Yeah.
Some of the hub budget, if I remember correctly, which I may not, includes the federal grant.
None of it included the federal grant.
Okay, the budget doesn't
Council,
include
do
the
you
federal
wanna just
grant.
clarify that?
Sure. So there was indication that, obviously we would be thrilled to receive a grant
Yes,
from the federal government. However, if that were not to come to fruition, that the village would pay the additional funds out of reserves.
Still no word.
Still
No
no
word.
word. I
Okay.
promise I will be shouting from
yes,
the rooftops as long as it's good news as soon as we hear something.
And is the contingency included in the budget?
Correct, yes. The
It is.
contingency
That
is
part is.
included, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other? Please.
Jane Mehy, 1471 Crystal Creek. I'm just going to start with a sentence and then a question. There'll be a question right away. I'm a bit perplexed that we have to wait for a developer to present an application to complete the column number 3. My question to you and to your council is, why don't you just disclose what is the maximum allowable that you are going to accept on behalf of the citizens of Anmore for line 3, for column number 3? It's not that difficult. You just tell us. We've had a talk together at a coffee shop in June. And I mean, you told me what you would potentially accept and what you would not accept.
I didn't give you a number, actually.
No,
to be
no, you didn't
honest.
give me numbers, but you.
Because I don't know, and I can't answer that
No, no,
question.
the point is not that. Is I'm talking about boundaries, about the maximum you would allow.
We have the minimum, and we presented that tonight, that we think in an RS1.
Yeah,
We're
but I
looking
don't
at
see
about
anything in line
1,000
3.
people.
I don't see anything in column number 3. I mean, would you think that as a representative of the citizen of Anmore, you would just tell us what is it that you would draw the line at?
I would have to see the whole proposal. I can tell you this.
It's not about the
if I can just finish.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if a proposal came forward for 10,000 people, not interested.
But
It wouldn't even go into column number 3.
I get it. Where's your red line?
I have to see it.
But it's irrelevant what they're going to propose. What is your red line?
A difference of opinion. Sorry.
Andrew Simpson, 1466. In the rush to have consultations on this report, which is not finished, it's partially finished, one thing that is very glaring to me is that there is nothing in the timeline here for a referendum on the actual issue of the designation of the Anmore lands to be rural or urban. And, you know, under the BC
Can I get
Ascent
to a
Voting.
question? Is there a question here?
I'm getting to the question here is why,
Yeah.
the question specifically, and I need to put some context around it, but the question specifically while I'm speaking you can think about is when in the timeline of this process are the residents going to have a referendum? Because under the Ascent Voting guidelines for the province, one of the key aspects here is that we have a significant number of petitions in excess of what is deemed reasonable under the Ascent Voting guidelines for residents wanting to have a referendum on this issue. And so I'd like to have a answer on record, because these records need to be reviewed by legal counsel at some point, perhaps.
If you're going to be talking about legal counsel, then we will
No.
not be engaging, so I'm sorry.
But
Anyway.
there has to be, I'm
I'm
not talking
sorry.
about legal counsel,
This-
but there has to be an
Mr.
answer.
Simpson, if you're going to let me finish, you've had the podium. We've answered this question over the past several months. We don't have an application in front of us. We have nothing to vote on, this council has said very clearly. So if you can just
Can I ask-
patient,
may I ask a-
Please? Okay. So until we get an application, we don't know what we're even going to be voting on. So the question, even if you reword it in several different ways, and then when you start coming up to a podium and threatening legal, we
I'm not
have to
threatening
shut
legal.
down.
No one's threatening
so there
legal
you
to
go.
you,
Okay.
but the point is, it's been asked many times, and that there are a greater number of residents who have signed a petition.
We've never seen that.
What would you like the residents to do you haven't asked us what
I
to
would
do.
love to see a petition. Yeah, please.
No, what would you like us to do to have the council
Share the
approve?
petition.
Yeah,
No,
any-
it's not a petition, there's hundreds of petitions.
Share the petition.
But
You've
what
seen
is
nothing.
what is the requirement that you would like to actually put this on the agenda of this process of changing the OCP? That would be
Please,
my
Ms.
question.
Halliwell.
Thank you. I think that probably from a process perspective, this is best answered by Ms. Elgrick. She can provide information around petitions as well as referendums.
Thank you. In terms of a petition, a group of residents or other interested parties could certainly submit a petition. There are requirements of what a petition constitutes under the community charter, and if you need me to point you to where that is, I'm happy to have you contact me at any time. In terms of Ascent Voting, this would not be something that would fall under that category. If there was a referendum, is the word that's being used, but it would be an opinion poll. There is no mechanism under legislation to hold a referendum for this issue.
I do believe other municipalities have had referendums on major infrastructure like sewers.
It likely, again, I'm happy to have you contact me and we can discuss it further, but it would likely be related to borrowing capacity is what those referendums would be. This is a land use decision and there's a legislative process for that, which includes a public hearing. A referendum is not part of that process, but certainly an opinion poll could be. But I'm happy to discuss that further if you'd like to reach out to me.
And-
My information's on the
Yeah,
village
and Prime
website.
Minister, you're more than welcome to forward any of these sort of or petitions to council. I've never, just to be honest, I've never seen it. I've never heard it. Please forward it on. We'd love to see it. Any opinions, we always appreciate.
There is, the petition in question, and that's been asked before, is very simple, though. As a resident of Anmore, would you support a designation of the Anmore South lands to urban, yes or no? It's very, very simple. And that's what a number, like I said, a significant number of
Yeah, it'd be
residents.
great to see it. Yeah, please share it with us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Doug Richardson, 2305 East Road. Councillor Trowbridge made an interesting point. There's a bunch of sunk cost in the village hall. What is it? How much is it? It's been going on 4 or 5 years now. There's trees being cut down, there's been tree surveys, there's been geotechnical surveys, there's been the design, there's been the concept drawings, etc. So what does that all add up to?
Ms. Halliwell?
I have that figure off the top of my head, but I can certainly follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thanks. Ms. Cook? Name and address, please.
Pardon?
Name and address.
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah.
thank you, short. Jody Summers Cook, 1660 East Road. My question is to Mayor McEwen. So I understand that Port Moody has just completed their own traffic study. I think that this information would be very beneficial for us going forward. We all know what Ioko Road is like. So if they are at capacity or over capacity, it's going to affect East and Sunnyside Road. Mayor McEwen, could you or would you ask the staff to request a copy of this traffic study and have it posted, say, to the Anmore Village site?
If they were willing to share it with us.
I understand that they would if it were to come from the village. So you will do that for us and post it to the site for us to read?
Ms. Halliwell?
Yeah, we can certainly follow up and request the report, and we would probably just provide a link to the information. It's not our information, so.
That's fine,
We
yeah.
would provide a link.
Yeah, I think it would be a good information going forward.
I think most importantly, in terms of the context of any proposal that comes forward on Anmore South is that information is available to take into consideration when a full traffic analysis is done. So not
Well-
to be taken out of context necessarily.
No, I
from the
realize we
proposal.
would be doing one on our own roads, but Port Moody butts right up to our roads over in Anmore South. So I think that this is going to be a big impact, so that would be awesome if you could do that for us.
It actually connects part of our village.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's
So
great.
that's great, thank you.
Okay.
Linda Weinberg, 2923 Fern Drive. I'm pretty old and I don't remember everything, but it seems to me for quite a while we heard about a $10 million hub. And it came from the village. I mean, it didn't come from the people out here. So the $10 million hub was moved down. It moved down to $8 million. And in that process, which I was very critical of, and I do have a question, I was very, very critical of the lack of citizen participation. And we've had that discussion. Now I hear that this hub is no longer viable at that price, and so we have to have a smaller hub. And when we had the,
Never said that.
excuse me?
Again, the 10 million has never been, we were actually around this, Ms. Halliwell, what was it, 6?
So there was no discussion about a requirement to have a smaller hub. The discussions in redesign could be materials being swapped out for less expensive options. So that's what we're talking about. We're not We're not talking about reducing the size of it overall. And in terms of the $10 million, when we had originally done the concept design, we were talking a budget of anywhere between $6 and $10 million, so 6 on the lower end. But council never authorized a
Oh,
$10
no,
million
I agree.
budget.
I understand that.
Council
Yeah.
authorized $8 million.
Yes.
Including the contingency.
I understand, and now the contingency is rolled into the basic
Through this-
price,
through
right?
this, process. And the other thing is that we have reduced a little bit when we did when it went out for tender.
Yes.
It reduced about 15,000 square feet, yeah.
So there will be no reduction in the size of the hub at this point?
That's yet to be determined. We're not saying that there won't be. We're saying that we have to go through a process to make sure we can bring the building in as intact as possible without going over budget.
Okay, so that brings me to my question, which is, during the entire process of this design, I felt that the community was not really involved. And what I'd like to know is the community at any way going to be involved in this process? We have Ms. Hollywell, Ms. Elric, I'm not sure who else, the designer, whatever. What we don't have is any person from the rest of the community, and it might be nice to do that.
Thank you. The back.
Dick Cresswell, 1608 East Road. And I must confess to being confused. I seem to come here quite often and be confused. Now, I don't know if I'm the one who's confused or you're confused, or you're not delivering messages to me that I can understand. I remember a number of years ago when we had a referendum, and I think it was called a referendum, but I can't be sure. It might have been called a survey.
It was a referendum on financing.
Pardon?
A binding referendum on finance version.
No, this had to do with whether we wanted to remain, have 1 acre zoning or less, something like that. I
Excuse
can't
me, Mr.
recall
Cresswell,
because.
are we not having a question, or are we going to have a
Pardon?
diatribe here? Are we going to have a question, or
Yeah,
are we
you're
going to
going
have
to
a
get a little
diatribe?
context first.
Pardon?
You're going to get a little context first, if you don't mind.
Well, as long as it's not too little, I don't mind.
Well, you haven't heard me yet.
Well, you're going on for quite a while without asking the
give me a
question.
break.
That's so rude. You guys are rude. Don't interrupt.
Listen, we listen to you occasionally, and we don't get very much. So just listen to me. Maybe you won't get very much either. But the point is that the reason I'm confused is because Ms. Ulrich mentioned that there's some difficulty in establishing the ground rules for a referendum. I know about the binding referendum. But we did have a kind of a referendum some years back. How did we get that referendum? And I'm not advocating, I know what I said last week, okay, I can remember it that far back. But how do we get a referendum under the circumstances that you've described, where it sounds like we can't have a referendum at all? Can you answer that question for me?
Yes, that is correct. That for a land
What is
use
correct?
It
Please.
is correct
Yep.
that for a land use decision, a referendum that is binding cannot be held. That is correct.
I didn't say that. I didn't ask the question about a
I'm
binding referendum. I said a referendum. I
Well-
understand you can't have a binding referendum. I understand that. But I don't understand that you cannot have a referendum or a survey initiated by a local council to decide whether or not we would like to have less than 1 acre.
Right. If I may, I think that it might just be the language that we're using that is different. In terms, when I think referendum, I'm thinking of a legal binding referendum. So
Choose-
it could be called a referendum, it could be called an opinion poll. it
Which
could
would
be
you like
called
to
a
call
survey.
it? Which would you like to call it?
I would not call it a referendum, I would call it an opinion poll,
Call it that.
okay?
Go ahead. Explain it.
An opinion poll could be anything the council directed.
Oh, so we can have that.
Yes, that's correct. I did not say that there could not be an opinion
Oh,
poll.
okay. If we can have it, maybe we can have it someday.
Yep, yep. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Oh.
Trudy Schneider, 2318 Sunnyside. I thought you were going to call again, sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt your, I know you want to go home. May I don't know how to do this. May I make a motion then?
You have to make a question.
I have to make a question.
Yes.
I asked if I may. Okay. What I really want to say, okay, this all started for me in April with a little thing from council. I'm sorry about a quick preamble. And it had to do with changing the OCP to make Anmore South urban, from rural to urban. That's how it all started. And then council, I think, listened to us, and we've done a lot of research. We've had reports come in. There have been lots of talking, and people have had a chance to have their say. And we have more information now, because that's basically what we wanted then. So can we now go back to April, and I still have the paper where it said about changing the OCP, and that was an initiative from council, which I probably wasn't paying attention back then, but I came out of the blue for me. First thing I heard was Anmore South. I never even knew where that was, and then this. But so now could we vote on that? Now that we do have more information, it's at least 7 months later. I've read everything that done. I've participated where I can, and I'm ready.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that we're going to be waiting for the workshop over, and then we're on a Christmas break, so maybe something we look at the beginning of the new year. Nobody on this council I've heard is opposed to having an opinion poll or anything like that.
Well, it's
so.
just that before, it seemed it was always, well, there's no proposal before us, but we didn't have one in April either. It was sort of a theoretical, and, you know, we'd never thought about it before, but we have. Okay, I would look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry for thinking you were done. Okay, motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody.